there, welcome to Ridge Church. We're so glad that you're here with us, whether you're tuning in from right here in Charlotte, North Carolina, or from anywhere else. At Ridge Church, we know that life is messy, and we hope the message you're about to hear encourages you, challenges you, and reminds you that you're never alone. Thanks for listening in.
All right, well, welcome. Glad you're here today. My name's Chris. I get to be one of the pastors around here. And for those of you that are newer to this place, these are my Panther rally shoes. It's a prophetic statement over the Super Bowl next year, all right? Just like to get that out of there. Some of you have been haters. It's all right. Hey, you just got to learn this is the city you're in, and we have a unique relationship with professional sports here, but it's our city, and we're sticking with it. Hopefully you are too. Hey, we are certainly glad that you're here. There's devastation in our world. I know you guys know that. I have a friend that leads a church in Malibu, which about 99 times out of 100, we're like, seriously, dude, that's a real hard gig in Malibu. But actually today and this season for all of our friends in LA and all the way through the coast and there's so much happening. And so just keep praying for them. There will be things practically that we can do to help as well. But even I think about my friend that's leading that church. The ones that are leading, they're supposed to be in a space to help, but they're devastated as well. And so sometimes the helpers can't even help. And we've partnered with Convoy of Hope in a couple of the last disasters. We'll do that again in this. They're some of the first boots on the ground and do incredible work. But I know many of you in this room have connections to someone that has been affected. And so we're thinking of you, thinking of them in that as well. We kicked off this series last week called A Better Question. And I introduced or reintroduced perhaps for some of you a question that I think is a better question than the normal like New Year's resolution, like get the new year started kind of question, which are usually like, what should I do about me? Like you might not say it that way, but like these are, and they're not bad. It's not a bad question, this normal kind of resolution thing, but we just think perhaps there's a better one. The normal resolutions are about a better me, right? They're like, how do I get skinnier, fitter? How do I get healthier, richer? You know, something needs to change in my life. And so we make resolutions, but we said last week that perhaps there's a better question, and I believe it is a better question, which is this: what breaks your heart? And what breaks your heart? Now, let me just, full transparency, as a pastor, I've been doing this for a long time, and here's what I know. Like, most of the time when I preach a message, people maybe think about it in the moment, maybe they mentally agree and nod, or mentally disagree and shake their head, and they think about it, but, you know, for a few seconds. But usually by the end of lunch, people have forgotten about my sermon and moved on about their day. In fact, they forgot that they even had a pastor or a church, right? By the end of lunch, and it's okay. I'm not offended by that, but every once in a while, some of you actually take it to heart. And apparently this last week I had quite a bit of that. I had a lot of you that said this question stirred with you. Like it was unsettling in some ways. It was clarifying in some ways. And some of you actually did some homework with it. I had one mom that reached out to me and said, hey, I actually took that question and I brought it to the lunch table and it became a part of our lunch conversation, to which I'll say, good job, Mom. That's a really good job. She said, so I asked this question to my family, like, hey, what's breaking your heart? And she said her college-age son waited for a second and then he answered this. He said, girls. That's not how I thought my message was going to land, but like, hey, I'm just glad you guys are paying attention and working it out at home. So next week, Patrick, my friend, is going to preach on girls and heartbreak, all right? So come back for that. Part 3 is going to be stellar. But here's what you guys do know. Questions are powerful. Talked about this last week as well as I was starting, that there are questions that when they're landed, the right question at the right time with the right tone sometimes can change an atmosphere. It can change. Like I had a leadership coach one time that led the entire journey by questions. The right questions at the right time would make me go introspective or really diagnose a situation. The right kind of question can lead an organization. I think the right kind of question at the right time can lead a nation to head in the right kind of direction or address the right kind of things. Questions are incredibly powerful. In fact, we said last week, and this will be a review for some of them, that Jesus actually is recorded, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the historical accounts, he's recorded asking 307 questions. But then when you look on the other side of it, he only directly, now he may have ended around some questions and eventually got there, but he only directly, at least in our record, answered 3 questions. In other words, the one person who actually had all the answers. I would argue the one person who actually is the answer to all the things in life is the one person who chose to step back and not answer the questions, but instead ask them. One of the most prolific, perhaps the most prolific question asker in human history. And I think that's interesting. I think there's something in that for us to learn, like as parents, as individuals, as someone that's in a dating relationship, the power of questions. One of the things that I think should not be overlooked is that one of the first recorded interactions between God and man actually revolves around a question. You got Adam and Eve in the garden. God gives them one thing that they're supposed to not do. They do, of course, just like our kids, they do the one thing they're not supposed to do. And then immediately they feel a sense of guilt and shame. And it started the cycle that moves to this day where we feel guilt and shame. It broke the relationship between a perfect God and these innocent people that were no longer innocent. And this is really good. Some of you need to hear this. Maybe this is the whole package that you need for the day. God did not enter the garden looking to condemn them. He did enter the garden, but he entered the garden looking immediately for restoration. It's a beautiful picture. But as he enters the garden looking for Adam and Eve that he knows have disobeyed and are now living in guilt and shame, he asks the question, where are you? Where are you? He's God. Created them, created the tree that they were hiding behind. He knew where they were. He didn't ask the question because he didn't know the answer. He asked the question because the very nature of the question was going to drive them into introspection where they had to acknowledge, had to settle with where they were and who they had become and what had happened in their relationship with God because of their disobedience, that it had been broken. The power of a question. Years ago, I started introducing into any of my team that would directly report to me. I flipped the paradigm. And like some of you, like if you're type A or if you just like, you're a list taker, like if you come in or you're a boss, you come in, you have like things like, hey, we need to work on this, this, and this. And I always had a list in my back pocket. But I flipped the script many years ago and I would lead off in one-on-ones. And I don't know where I learned this or where I picked this up. But instead of making a statement, I would pull back and say, hey, if you were in charge of you, if you were the boss of you, what are a couple of things that you would tell you, man, you're doing great, keep up the good work? And what are a couple of things where you'd say, hey, we need to work on this area a little bit? And it's interesting. It changes the dynamic of the conversation every single time because now it's introspective and the conversation changes. And oftentimes those individuals will come to the same conclusions about their job, what they're doing well, what they need to work on that I would come to. But a question's a powerful thing. My instinct, and I bet some of you are like this as well, is to make statements, especially if I'm in a hurry, especially if I'm anxious, like if I don't have the luxury of time frames, like I just want to come in and go, this is what we're doing, boom, 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 boom. But I'm telling you, questions will serve us so much better. So back to this question. What breaks your heart? Now, this is a hard question. Like this isn't like just for some of you, something immediately comes to your mind, but this is the stuff that's like not okay. Maybe it's not okay with you, but maybe it's just not okay like in general. Like it's not okay in humanity. It's not okay in our culture. It's not okay in our country. Like the thing that, like I said last week, maybe you wish you had never seen it or heard it because once you saw it, once you heard about it, you couldn't unsee it, you couldn't unhear it. And perhaps it bothers you because it feels so big what's on the other side of you and me answering this question that we don't know what to do. You're like, okay, yeah, there are some things that break my heart, but what am I supposed to do about that thing? And so what we end up doing consequently, oftentimes, is we do like we do that homeless person on the corner. We just bounce our eyes. We bounce our eyes. And we think, well, someone else will do it. Well, someone else can solve it because we don't know what to do. And we don't know how to engage. But let me just say, this question and what we're doing in this series, this is so much bigger than a sermon. This is so much bigger than a sermon series. This question, or a version of this question, I truly believe is a gateway to our purpose. I think this unlocks the door to purpose. And maybe you need to hear this. Maybe you need to be reminded. Maybe you need to hear this as it's true because you don't believe it is true. But you are made on purpose, but you're made with a purpose and for a purpose. There's something not only that God has for you, but for you to do. God doesn't just love you and design you intentionally. He designs you intentionally with things that he means for you and me to accomplish in this world. You're built, you're designed on purpose with a purpose. Now, let me just say this. Purpose is essential. It's an essential component of life. Like kind of intuitively we know this, even if you didn't take a philosophy class and learn something about this, like intuitively we know this and we pursue it. And here's what I would tell you. You and I will always be unsatisfied if we pursue our lives or pursue something in our lives without purpose underneath it. Like if we don't have purpose, we'll end up spinning our wheels and we will chase something in our lives that's just unattainable. Now, this message today, as I designed it, it's for everyone. Whatever season of life you're in, this is for you. But let me just say, if you're a teenager, if you're a college student, if you're a young professional kind of in your first job or second job, just kind of getting things cranked up and starting, you're an entrepreneur and you've just started something. Let me just tell you, this, if you get this now, this can change the trajectory of your life. There is a massive difference between the pursuit of purpose and the pursuit of happiness. Now, on the surface, they feel and seem very similar. The message of our culture, that again, I don't think they're always just trying to be twisted, but the message of culture is the pursuit of happiness, is not the pursuit of purpose. And these things are not the same. And the major difference is that the pursuit of happiness is ultimately self-focused. The pursuit of happiness is ultimately about me. And here's the thing, it's this loop that can never be satisfied. And the reason it can never be satisfied is because it's based on this false assumption or this false premise that I can fill myself up. That's the only way it can work. If the pursuit of happiness is a real thing, it's based on the assumption that I can pursue things that eventually, if I get the right structure, organization, and an accumulation of things in the right order, then it can actually fill me up. But it's not true. It's based on this assumption that if I have the right relationships in my life, if I have the right job, if I get the right promotion, if I marry the right person, if I have the right amount of dollars in my bank account, if I can get all these things sorted out and filled up just right, then I'm going to experience happiness. But again, it's based on the assumption that we can fill ourselves up. And here's the thing. You can chase this idea. You can chase it into your second marriage or your third. You can chase it into your second career or your third career. You can chase it into your 40s, into your 50s. You can chase it into retirement. But it'll never satisfy. It will not lead you where you think it leads you. It will not lead you where people in culture around you think that it leads them and tell you that it's going to lead you. It will not go where you think. I love how Andy Stanley says this. It's the best summary of this idea of anybody I've ever heard. He says that being consumed with you will ultimately consume you. He goes on to say this, that when your life becomes about filling yourself up, this idea of the happiness pursuit, which I think many of us are on and we don't even know we're on it. He continues, he says this, he says, we will use ourselves up trying to fill ourselves up. In other words, you may fill up the garage, you may fill up the glass, you may fill up the bed, you may fill up the trophy shelf. You may fill up the resume. Listen, you may fill up your life with all these amazing, like the bucket list kind of experiences. But it will not lead you, and it will not lead you where you think it's going to lead you, and it will not end how you think it's going to end. Eventually, it will burn us up and leave us empty. Now, some of you have not heard anything I said because you're like, he's got a visual illustration. So let's just go ahead and get to that. You're like, was he talking that whole time? All right, so this is my favorite Christmas present that I got. I'm a simple guy, right? So I love like open flames and like running water or even just still water, like looking at a lake or a pond. Like it's something about it that's extremely life-giving for me. And so my wife got me this tabletop fire pit, if you call it that. And this thing, like when I open it, I'm like, oh, that's kind of nice. And then I'm like, I love this thing. So every time I go outside, like I'm like taking the dogs out and all my family look out and I'm like standing by the fire and they're like, all right, this is ridiculous. Like, so I love this gift. And the first couple of times I lit it, it's pretty interesting. It works kind of like, for those of you that are old enough to understand this, it works like one of the old school oil lamps. Where like when you light it, it doesn't like burn the wick. The oil or the fuel is drawn up through the wick, and then it just literally when you light it, it just burns the fuel and it doesn't burn the wick. And so the first few times I did this is really dangerous to do inside, but we're gonna do it anyway. We're living on the edge here today. First couple of times I did this, I'm like, oh, that flame actually goes pretty high. And then I was like, I actually feel that. That's incredible. And so I was loving it, right? So I lit this thing several times, put the fuel in it, did the thing. Then one time I came out, so I was letting the dogs out. So I lit this thing. I wasn't paying attention that the fuel had run out. And so when I lit it, immediately it started to singe the wick that's inside and started to burn it. Like, just like that. Now, I had done this 2 or 3 times, and it literally didn't even leave a burnt mark ever on the wick. Now, here's what's interesting. Before when I had the fuel in it and after when I had no fuel in it, the experience for me on the other side was pretty much the same. Same flames, they weren't any higher or lower, the same kind of feel, the same kind of vibe. The experience was pretty much the same. But the difference is when there was no fuel inside, it literally started to burn the wick. And it happened immediately. This is a really good picture of the difference between the pursuit of purpose and the pursuit of happiness. On the outside, they look very similar. They create a pretty similar experience for you and me. But on the inside, one of them is silently, sometimes without even noticing it, it is burning us up. It is consuming us on the inside. Now, I'm going to put this out before some of you feel the need to call 911 or can't pay attention for the rest of the message. Do we need an applause? All right. I have very few gifts and skills, so I need to create applause for them when something amazing happens. It's interesting when I think about this, Jesus teaches very clearly that the pursuit of purpose is almost opposite in every way to the pursuit of happiness. And the interesting thing is our culture, and I'm not vilifying culture, I'm just stating what is. Our culture oftentimes measures things in terms of the pursuit of happiness, not the pursuit of purpose. In fact, I would say it this way, Jesus oftentimes is opposite. He talks about filling. He talks about how filling is achieved through emptying. Like if you want to fill yourself up, you got to empty yourself out. No one else tells you that. That's like opposite of most of what we hear. He tells us that gaining is achieved through giving. Like if you want to gain something, you give something. You don't accumulate it, you give it away. That's opposite. This is how Jesus framed much of what his kingdom was about and how his life was to be lived and the Jesus way was to be lived. He said that winning is achieved through losing. There is no type A competitive person that lives in this culture that likes hearing that. Like he said, hey, there is a version of you choosing to lose in certain ways at certain times that actually postures us to win. And I want to focus on all of those, but particularly on the last one a little bit today. I want to say this, that following Jesus, and if I could just frame it this way, that say, following Jesus, if you think of that as purpose, because I believe it is, then when we follow Jesus, it's a direct line to our purpose. But following Jesus or purpose is about self-denial. It is not about self-improvement. This is not an anti-self-improvement thing. I think you should have goals. I think you should have New Year's resolutions. I think you should do self-improvement. But what I would say is following Jesus is not about self-improvement. Jesus and let's do some good things. It's about self-denial, and that's a very different thing. The result, when we do this, and many of us won't, but when we deny ourselves, when we start to embrace this opposite way that Jesus talks about, the result is that we get happiness and purpose. You get both. God's not against happiness. He would just say, though, when we get this flipped and we start to pursue happiness, we end up with neither. We end up not having purpose, and we end up with a life that eventually consumes us and burns us up because it's not how we were designed to function. But if we pursue this life of self-denial, this life of emptying ourselves and giving ourselves away. What ends up happening is we actually get both. We get happiness and we get purpose. Now, I want you to imagine this. If you can imagine the days of Jesus and he can do miracles, that's a pretty cool party trick. Like if you could do that, your friends would be coming over way more often, right? You're like, hey, come on over. You need to bring food? No, I got it, man. I'm going to handle this. No, bring the whole neighborhood. I've got a Happy Meal. Watch what I can do with this thing, right? Like he could do miracles, and the miracles, as you can imagine, as he would do all these different things, healing people, it drew a crowd. Jesus certainly was a profound teacher that taught in a way that people couldn't understand. They'd never heard, but it was largely his miracles that drew people. If you got a hungry crowd and you feed them Happy Meal lunches that they weren't expecting, they tend to follow you. And so Jesus had a crowd, but if you can imagine this, because of the nature of the miracles, many of the crowd that were following Jesus, anytime he would look over his shoulders, there's a crowd. Many of the times that a crowd was following Jesus, it was because they were consumers. Like not like in a bad, like they weren't trying to be evil people. They're like, Jesus, we followed him and we saw some cool stuff. We're going to follow him some more. They were consumers by nature. And so there's this one moment where Jesus kind of looks over his shoulder at one of the crowds and he makes a statement that thins the crowd. Because again, he's got a lot of consumers in the crowd. This is what he says. And Mark records this. This is actually Mark recording what Peter said. It says, and he summoned the crowd with his disciples. He's like, hey, I want my closest guys to hear this and see this as well. He summoned the crowd with his disciples, and he said to them, if anyone wishes to come after me, time out. He says this to a crowd that's following him. They're like, Jesus, clearly we want to come after you. Like, we're following you right now. But he's not talking about like literally just walking behind him. When Jesus says anyone that wants to come after me, he's talking about a way of life. He's saying, hey, any of you that want to follow my way of life, like all these things you're seeing on the surface, they're not just, those are the party tricks, but it comes from something deeper within, a way of life. He said, those of you that want to follow my way of life. Now, let me just say, anytime I preach a passage like this, anytime you've heard it, it's so easy and actually a little bit fun to judge the crowd because it always feels like the crowd's not us, right? Like you make fun of, you're like, these guys, they didn't know what they were doing. They're just following Jesus. They didn't even know he was a Messiah. They're just following for the tricks of the trade, all the stuff. But I would argue that crowd's not very different, maybe no different than almost every crowd, this one included, that are gathered right now all across the country, all across the world, in places just like this. Not bad people, but if we're honest, sometimes the reason we're here is because it's, Jesus, what have you done for me lately? Or what can you do for me today? There is a component of us, myself included, that show up to something like this. We show up to crowds like this because there's something in it that we want. There's something on the other side of Jesus that we're looking for and that we hope we can get. And so Jesus says to this crowd, if anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself, never a popular phrase to use in any culture, and he must take up his cross and he must follow me. This is the point where probably someone in the back said, oh, that's pretty good, Jesus. Can we talk more about the miracles? Let's do some more of the miracles, that deny yourself stuff. We're really not into that in our culture, Jesus. When he says he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me, let me tell you what's happening culturally in that time. If you ever saw someone with a cross, close to a cross, on a cross, carrying a cross, what you knew immediately, if they were in proximity to a cross that belonged to them, they were not free. They were not free people. They were not free to live as they wanted. They were not free to do as they wanted. So Jesus is saying this, and he is making this word picture. It's very clear, and anyone in that culture would have understood what he was saying. When he says, you gotta deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. He's saying, hey, your life, if you want to follow me, your life is not your own. You don't get to just choose your way. If you want to follow me, you have to choose my way. You have to choose my lifestyle. And let me just say, this is an important note. Just because someone was in the crowd following Jesus didn't mean they had chosen the way of Jesus. That's true then and that's true now. Just because someone's in the crowd doesn't mean they've chosen to follow the way of Jesus. He continues, he says, he must deny himself, he must take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life, which is all of us, right? Like given the option to save our life or not, all of us want to save our life. Whoever wants to save their life must lose it. Now, when you hear that word lose it, he's not talking about death That's not the context. He's saying this. He's saying that when we become hyper-focused on and start to measure our lives in relationship to how everything orients to us, when we start to measure our lives in terms of how everything affects us, how everything and everyone makes us feel in an effort to save our lives, in an effort to preserve our lives, in an effort to better our lives. He's saying that the very thing that we're doing that we think is going to save or better our lives is actually working against us. When I was in college, we did what all college kids do. We did some things that we didn't think out. We had this one, if you're a college kid, man, it's going to go great for you. Some of us survived it, right? When we were in college, we had this one place where there was a lake and a rope swing. Have you ever seen any of those videos where someone totally underestimates their ability to handle their own body weight on a rope swing? And it goes viral. It's awesome. If you're here today, it's good to have you, famous among us. We had this guy. He was a larger fellow, and he was strong, really strong guy. And he jumped onto this rope swing, and I'm talking about this thing was not certified, right? We should not have been on this. It was really high, and he grabbed a hold. He jumped up high, grabbed a hold of this rope swing, and it immediately, the weight of his body and the force of the jump took him to the pinnacle of the rope swing. Like he went up high. And at that moment, we all looked and thought, oh boy, this is not going to end well. And at this moment, he should have let go, but he was so high that he knew letting go was probably going to hurt him, which was probably true. But we knew it was going to get worse the longer he held on. And so in that moment where he should have let go, it was almost like his brain and his body just stopped communicating. And he literally locked down on the rope. But the problem was he was already, the centripetal force, he is already at the end of this thing, and like his body weight was now like 3 times his body weight because of how gravity was working. So he's holding onto this rope knowing I can handle my body weight, but he couldn't. And he started to slide down the rope. But at this point, as he's starting to slide down the rope, he grips even tighter. And he slides down the rope more, and he should have let go, but his brain just couldn't do it, and it's all happening like this. He slid all the way down that rope to the end and fell in the water. When we pulled him out of the water, we took him straight to the hospital, 2nd and 3rd degree burns on both of his hands. I don't know if as an adult he does rope swings anymore. I'm guessing probably not. This is the picture Jesus is creating. This guy, the very thing that he's like, it's instinct, right? He's like, I got to hold on to this because this is going to save my life. The very thing that he was doing was actually hurting him, was actually going to put him in the hospital, was actually going to create more damage. This is the point that Jesus is trying to make. He's saying, like, there are things in our life that from our vantage point, it looks like the thing you're doing is just sorting out your life and saving your life. And he's saying some of the things that we're doing are actually a happiness quest and we don't realize it. We think it's going to make life better for us and our kids, and then ends up actually hurting us because it's not how we were designed to live. The point of Jesus' teaching, he says, living for ourselves, living with our protection, our comfort, our happiness. And let me just say, none of those things are wrong. There's nothing wrong with any of them. But when we live with those things as the top goal of our life, it will always be, at some point, eventually, unfulfilling. Because, and don't be offended, here's why. Because your life is not enough to live for. My life is not enough to live for. And at some point, when we're just trying to fill ourselves up and it's not working and we're just living for us, it's only a matter of time till we come to a place that we realize this isn't working. I remember the first time I read this quote, I've used it before in sermons. The famous actor Jim Carrey, comedian, the Grinch, however you know him, he made this statement. I think it's fascinating. This was like at the pinnacle, at the top of his career when he's the most famous. He said, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see it's not the answer. See, the biggest miss for us when we accidentally or intentionally find ourselves chasing happiness rather than what God designed us to do is that we miss out on purpose. That's the real loss, is that you live your life and you miss out on a sense of purpose, and purpose is essential for life. Again, people consumed with themselves will eventually consume themselves. Let me just tell you something about your design and my design. We're designed to be givers. We're designed to be contributors by God's design. When you and I start to live consistent with our design, here's what's interesting. Even people that don't believe there is a designer, when they start to live consistent with their design, they will find a greater sense of purpose. Not ultimate purpose, but it'll move in that direction. Let me just say, if we don't, like if we continue to pursue happiness, like we will get burned. With purpose, you'll enjoy the fire and it will never consume you. This is one of the biggest reasons that I want every single person that I know, that my wife and I have made our lives about this. Every person that I know, and if you're here today and you're not a follower of Jesus, I want you to be one. Not just so you can go to heaven one day, that's a pretty big deal, but because I don't believe there's full purpose without it. And when you start to run in rhythm with your creator, your designer, because you have a design and there is a designer. When you begin to live in relationship with that designer, it brings purpose to your life. And it's the best kind of life. It's what I want for every single person that I care about, that I know, people that I've never met. Why would you want to live without purpose? Mark 8:35, he continues, says, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Gospel just means good news. When he says whoever loses their life for me, like sometimes this gets over spiritualized. This is not talking about doing stuff for Jesus. Whoever loses their life for me, we're going to do nothing. Everything's going to be Jesus. He's saying this. He's talking about embracing the way of Jesus. When he says this, he's talking about embracing, like in other words, when he says losing life, he literally means anyone who chooses to, this is what Jesus is saying, anyone who chooses to live their life like me, how I live my life, which begs the question, how did Jesus live his life? What does it look like to live like me, live like Jesus? Matthew records this, Jesus saying, the Son of Man, talking about Jesus, did not come, if you want to know how he lived, he did not come to be served, but to serve. That's countercultural. He came to give his life as a ransom for many. I find the greatest irony in this. The one person ever to live on the planet who could have actually made it about him and it would have been okay, chose not to. The one person who would have been, it would have made sense for people to give up their lives for him. Instead, he chose, no, I'm going to give up my life for you. This is the rhythm. This is the way of Jesus. It was about giving himself away. Is this counterintuitive? Yes. Is it worth it? Absolutely. And we don't have to live 30 years of brokenness in order to discover this. This can be discovered right now. So this question, what breaks my heart? This isn't just a good gut check question, like make you feel a little bit guilty at church. Yeah, I felt something. It's not that. It's bigger than that. This question, what breaks my heart, I believe is a gateway to purpose. Because when we pay attention to what breaks our heart, and then we begin to live in that direction, we begin to act on those things, it's a gateway to unlock the very things that we were created to do and be about. And let me just tell you, when we do this, like if we started to do this, when we live differently, when you and I choose to give our lives away in the midst of a thing where everybody else is hoarding and collecting and accumulating. Again, I'm not talking about saving. Proverbs talks about saving and wisdom and retirement. I'm not talking about that. But when we start to give our lives away and distribute our lives when others are protecting them, let me tell you what it's going to do. It's going to cause curiosity in people. It's going to create a sense of wonder in people, because it's countercultural. Like in a culture that is like, this is my life. You do you, man. You take care of you, get likes, get followers, get your brand going. Make sure you're getting your royalties, man. They're using your words. You're getting your royalties in a world that is all about you do you. Then all of a sudden, when you look out and you distribute your life and you give away credit and you give away your life, it will be countercultural. And when, not if, when people take notice, we get to redirect the attention to our Father in heaven. They're like, why are you doing that? Because Jesus did it. Why are you doing that? That's what God did for me through Jesus. Why are you living like that? Because that's how Jesus lived, and it's a better way of life, and I found purpose in it. John Tyson's one of my favorite current pastors. He's a guy and pastors a church in New York. And he has this quote that I wrote in my notes many years ago. He said, "Live in a way that provokes questions to which the only answer is Jesus." Why? Why are you acting like that? Why are you doing that? Why are you like that with your spouse? Why are you like that in the dating relationship? Why are you so generous? Why? Jesus. It's the way of Jesus. If I could summarize all of this, perhaps a decent way to say this is empty is full. Man, you want to live a full life? Empty yourself out. Test me. Don't test me, test Jesus. So this is the pathway to life. Listen, when we chase personal happiness, eventually it'll consume you. It's a different life. When you find yourself in the rhythm of what outsourcing and crowdsourcing, how you chase and pursue happiness, eventually it will consume you. But when you find the rhythm of purpose, when you start to empty yourself into the lives of others, something different is going to happen. Listen, if the things that concern you the most, if the things that concern me the most, the things that get all of your dollars, all of your time, all of your strategy, all of your Excel spreadsheets, all of your vision are about you, if they're about me, then eventually we're going to be consumed. I would just say it doesn't lead where you think it's going to lead. So I want to ask the question one more time. What breaks your heart? What breaks your heart? Is it possible that you and I, somewhere along the way, realizing it or maybe not realizing it, got on a happiness pursuit instead of a pursuit of purpose? Because at some point, we'll realize that stuff never had the capacity or ability to fill us up. There's something greater. If it's on your heart, let me just tell you this. When you think about what breaks your heart, if it's on your heart, then it's probably something God means for you to do. It's one of the interesting things. I've been doing this for a long time, and oftentimes, it happens all the time. People have this thing that God put on their heart for me to do and the church to do. I'm like, I don't think that's how it works. I think there's a chance. Hey, did you ever consider if that's on your heart, God wants you to do it? Maybe he'll put on my heart things that he wants me to do. And certainly it might happen in the context of community as we discuss things that our light comes on and we go, I should do that. But if there's something that breaks your heart, then maybe there's something you should do about it. And if you don't know what to do, start by praying about it and just take a step. Do something. The moment that you step out of your comfort zone to do something that makes it or the person, whoever it is, whoever the person is, to make it better, whether it's big or small, according to Jesus, you are taking a step towards saving your life. Not in an eternal life in heaven kind of way. The work of Jesus on the cross is the only thing that can do that, but saving your life in a sense of purpose. Saving your life in a sense that I'm not going to live my life just burning my life up. It's a powerful thing to live with purpose. So, what breaks your heart? Let's do something about it. Let me pray for us. Father, you are good. And I'm so grateful that you didn't pull back the hard things. That God, some of the things that you teach through and that Jesus taught and modeled of ways of life that are better are not always easier. God, they're not always the thing that we would see in the culture around us, but thank you for teaching those things. Thank you for giving us a pathway, not just to pursue things that eventually will consume us, but instead to pursue something that brings purpose into our lives. I pray for the men, women, the teenagers, college students that today recognize they've never taken a step in your direction. They've never chosen to follow you. Will you give them the courage to take that step and begin the journey? Father, for us in this room, as we wrestle with this question, what breaks our heart, will you show us? Maybe just drop some breadcrumbs and show us the next step. Show us who we need to partner with, the organization that perhaps is doing something about the thing that our heart breaks for, and show us how we can be your hands, your feet, and your voice in this world. We love you. In Jesus' precious and powerful name we pray. Amen.
Thanks for listening today. If you're in the Charlotte or Matthews, North Carolina area, you're always invited to catch us online or join us in person at one of our 2 service experiences, 9:30 and 11 a.m. in the Ridge Auditorium, or streaming live to our cafe venue. We hope to see you soon.